don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
Welcome back to another episode of Word Docs. I'm here with Amy.
Hi.
Who's struggling not to giggle. And Alex.
Hello.
Who's also now struggling not to giggle.
Well, she set me off. She was grinning. She set me off.
We are still recording over Skype. So we can see each other's faces perhaps a little bit too clearly. Soon we'll be back in a room where we'll be able to turn away from each other, turn our backs on each other and still record. That'll be a sad day, except it'll be nice to be together.
We should never be on a serious panel together. I don't think we'd be able to do it.
No, but it'd be a good panel.
It would be a good panel.
It'd be interesting.
It would be a great
Absolutely.
panel.
Just like Amy and I launch into a polemic.
Yeah, head to head.
Sean.
Alex.
This week,
we are talking about guilty pleasures.
In fiction. In fiction,
yes. And my novelistic guilty pleasures at the moment, I'm reading a series of books by Andrew Cartmel. Doctor Who fans might recognise his name. He was a script editor for Doctor Who in the 80s and 90s, and in fact, the Cartmel Master Plan. Yes, is a big issue in Doctor Who at the moment. But he's a crime writer at the moment, and he's got a series of novels called The Vinyl Detective.
I thought he was dead. Is he still with us?
Oh no, he was very young, shockingly young when he was working on Doctor Who.
Sorry to say that he was dead. That was a bit blunt.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mr.
Andrew Cartmel. So his series of books is called The Vinyl Detective. It's about a guy who collects vinyl and is into high definition stereo, high fidelity stereo, and he also solves crime while he's doing it. As somebody who loves music and stuff, I'm really enjoying these books, but they are a little bit sexist and maybe a little bit racist.
Do they have titles named after albums? That seems like a given.
No, it's sort of on vinyl technologies. So Written in Dead Wax is the first one, I think, and Dead Wax is the bit of the record that doesn't have any grooves in it.
Yeah.
In the centre, and the latest one's called flip back or flat back, I think, and that refers to a particular kind of packaging that vinyl had a long time ago. So there are certain ideological things in it that make me uncomfortable, but golly, I enjoy them, and I get very excited when the new one comes out because I know it's just going to have cats in it and it's going to be funny, and he might attempt to be sexy every now and again, and it'll have lots of stuff about music, and so that's my current guilty pleasure. What's yours? Do you guys have anything that's on the tip of your tongues to reveal to the world?
I just love that you mentioned cats. That it's a book with cats in it. I'm there.
They're good cats. He writes cats really well.
I'm there. I'm down with it. Music and cats. I think I've said before, at some point, I don't know when, I no longer have guilty pleasures. I don't know whether it was being a film student in the 90s and just owning all the trash. I loved it all. And I think I'm the same with books. But you recently said, Sean, perhaps in the version of this where I forgot to hit record.
There's a confession.
You said something about the kind of books that you keep in your bedroom, like away from the public. I was thinking about that, what I keep. And I have my favourite books in my bedroom, but I also have my romance collection in my bedroom. But I don't think that's so much. It probably is a little bit about not being judged because I can't be bothered having that conversation every time. But also they're the books people most borrow, and I don't like lending books. So that says something about how they're everyone's guilty pleasure. They're like, oh, I haven't read that one.
50 Shades Freed. I haven't read it yet.
Do you know, we were packing up the books the other day because we were going to paint the room, and I had 50 Shades of Grey, but someone gave it to me. They were like, I couldn't finish it, and I couldn't finish it either. So
my Aunt Debbie gave it to Nana Joy. Now, Nana Joy just turned 92 this week. I don't think she needs that in her life. Perhaps she does. Oh my
God, I have this conversation with my students, though, because they talk about old people like they're all the same. I'm like, my parents are in their 70s. They were young in their 60s, man.
They're probably more,
and
yes.
Even my grandma, she was like young in the era where they were like drinking gin and smoking, and like they were mad people in their 20s and 30s.
I often say that to students because I think students can be weirdly conservative about things, and they assume that older generations are more so. And I kind of go, I think I was a wilder kid than most of the people I'm teaching.
Totally.
And I think that previous generations, I mean, Nana Joy, Nana Joy, I don't know. Who knows? You've seen some of the gothy pictures of her. Who knows? She went hang gliding a couple of years ago. So who knows? But I think that's a really good point, well made. We do often make the mistake of boxing people or forgetting the person that was there. I have a great actor friend called Bridget Walters who's probably in her 80s. She's always naked backstage. Like, just constantly.
Yeah, you know. Like, because my dad is like mid-70s and he was in Morocco in 1970 and stuff. But also, in a writing group I was in, there was a woman who volunteers to read at in hospitals and at nursing homes to older people, and she abridges the books.
Oh,
and I was outraged.
okay.
I was like, don't be taking out the sex scenes. Those people need the sex scenes. And are you thinking that you get to like 83 and you've not had sex? Like, come on.
How deeply condescending, I think. Yeah.
So we're talking guilty pleasures, and Amy has none, which will truncate our conversation dramatically.
I was going to say Netflix. All right. So on Netflix, the thing that you may not realise about me is I'm a bit obsessed with sports documentaries. Like that Formula One series, Drive to Survive, I think is one of the best documentary series I've ever seen. It's made by the people who made the Amy Winehouse doco and the Senna doco, and I am now obsessed with Formula One again. Now, I did grow up in Adelaide between 85 and 95 when we had the Grand Prix.
Terrible years. Terrible
but,
times.
you know, it goes against all my environmental beliefs, right?
Yes.
Those gas-guzzling things, and it's macho and elitist, and they're in Monaco, and it's just everything I hate, but I'm obsessed, and I'm even listening to Formula One podcasts now.
What have you got against Monaco?
Well, it's just where the super rich go to pay no tax. All the drivers move to fucking Monaco because they don't have to pay tax on their millions of dollars, and that just sucks.
I'm imagining a Formula One podcast just being the sound of cars going from one ear to the other.
You can hear all the engines being tested in the background when they interview people. It's a little annoying.
Wow.
But,
So Dad took me to the Grand Prix when I was a little kid. I went for 5 minutes and went, I'm done, Dad. I'm done.
Yeah. I went on a practice day on a date, and that was enough for me. It was good to hear the sounds and just see how fast the cars go. But ever since then, it's just been shaking my fist at the angry bees across the parklands from where I live. Go away, angry bees.
I'm trying to write something.
Off my lawn.
Yeah.
Alex, do you have any guilty pleasures?
Yes. Yes.
Sorry,
I do,
rhetorical
Sean.
question.
Yes,
you can actually
yes, I
see
do,
his
Sean.
bookshelf behind him.
You
so-
can see my bookshelf and my DVD shelf. Yeah, okay. So how much time do you have? I don't hide my guilty pleasures. They're kind of semi-proudly displayed. And not
No, because
anything
we can
really...
actually see a poster of Buffy, a poster of Catwoman, Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman, a poster of Sylvester the cat.
Catwoman's next to Sylvester the cat. They've
That's
got a
cute.
thing going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is
They're kind of
perfectly
looking at each
logical.
other.
They're
They
kind of
are.
looking at each other with a bit of, come hither. Let's move on. So, which my students have pointed out. One of my students went, "Is Sylvester strategically placed next to like that's been thought through?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it has." But so in novel world, it's the skullduggery pleasant. Has anyone besides me read? I think your daughter's reading them, Amy.
Yeah, but I have not.
I've read one. They're fun.
Skullduggery pleasant. And he's actually, Derek Landy was a screenwriter. And you can see that in the books. They are very they're very dialogue heavy, and most of the action tends to be fight scenes. And all of the characters more or less sound the same. They're all very witty, then they have fights, and they're all very witty, and they have fights. So on a kind of, I guess, a more objective level, I would say these are screenplays that have been turned into novels, and I don't know why I like them. But he makes me laugh out loud without fail. He makes me, like, I know you don't do that very often with a book.
No, I'm like that with the Red Dwarf books, the first two Red Dwarf books. They are so funny.
Yeah, so anything that does that. And when a new and there's been, I don't know how many there are on my shelf, and spin-off novels and all the rest of it, but when a new skullduggery pleasant novel comes out, I am a 5-year-old boy in a bookshop. I bound up there. Sometimes I try and buy, like last time I did it, I bought 1984 at the same time, thinking
Just
it would
to
kind
pretend.
of offset,
This one's for me. This one's for my nephew. It's fine.
Exactly. And the girl behind the counter just looked at me and she's like, I know. Same thing thing when I buy Moscato. It's that same level of judgment.
I remember that thrill of, because I used to collect Doctor Who novels right up until I was a teenager, and I remember that thrill very clearly of walking into a bookshop and seeing one you didn't have.
Oh, tremendously exciting. Yeah.
It is. And I never completed the collection. I grew up and became too mature for it, supposedly. But just not that long ago, only 4 or 5 years ago, I was at a secondhand bookstore in Port Elliot and I found a big stack of secondhand Doctor Who novels. So I rang up my stepson who was home and said, take a photograph of my shelves. There's bound to be some here I don't have. I ended up buying all of them because we couldn't get the photos to work.
Wow.
And that brought me within 4 or 5 of a complete set. So then I went on the hunt to finally complete my Doctor Who set. And now I have.
You have them all.
I have them all. Target novels. Beautiful.
I kept collecting Sweet Valley High long past the age I should have been.
Oh, yes, Sweet Valley High.
I loved them. And then also when I got into romance, I don't feel any insecurity anymore about my intellect or my taste, or I'm totally open. I have no guilt about any of it anymore.
I don't feel insecurity either, but for different reasons. I just know my taste is bad and I'm intellectually a little bit out there. So, it's not that I'm like taking pride. It's just, it's acceptance.
I think you like all the good stuff as well, like all the high art as well as the low art. So
yeah, but I didn't like Moby Dick, so,
Oh, who likes Moby Dick? Honestly?
I've never even tried it because I've assumed, perhaps incorrectly, probably correctly, that I won't like it.
Just a lot of chapters on whale blubber. A lot of chapters on whale blubber. That's all I have to say.
Strange fetish to have. That's,
Well, it's pre-Wikipedia, obviously.
But I used to be, as a teenager, quite embarrassed about, because people would make fun of you and embarrassed about liking romance, but I used to get, Joanna Lindsay used to have a book out every 6 months, and it was so exciting when the book came out, and I'd read it in like 2 hours. I'd be done.
It's exciting to think that you've put books out there that people would have been that excited about, particularly sequels or I think that's a really good feeling. I think that's really exciting. I have just had a memory that this is completely something I've forgotten. In primary school, we had those Doctor Who books in the library, and I had a bit of OCD as a kid, so I got them all and put them on a single shelf.
Good on you.
And used to drive, the librarians hated me. Like, Alex has been back in the library putting the Doctor Who, but I just love seeing them all on one long shelf. And I've got box sets behind me that speak to that same problem. You can see the Buffy box sets.
I love the way that it looks on the shelf too, like the artwork of when it all matches.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love the Tesla Sue books I had out recently. The covers, the spines all matched up, so that the mountain range, they're in different colours and different heroes on each spine, and the heroine on the spine of the fourth one. But the mountain range matched up when you put them together. I loved that.
That's very cool. Very cool.
Alex, you'll be pleased to know, next time you come over, I'll show you my single line of all my Doctor Who novels, all in one great big long shelf.
Come and see his
But I'll also show you my complete Doctor Who DVD set that's in chronological order. It's so much fun.
The completion of the dream.
Oh, see, I used to put the authors in the year that the book came out instead of the groups.
So our guilty pleasure is bookshelves and cataloguing.
Oh, but I will also have multiple editions of the same book, just have the different covers.
See, my dad had all these famous 5 novels, but the termites just went through them, like a tunnel of termites went right through them. And it was awful because he took it off the shelf to say, I've got these famous, and as he did it, it just kind of crumbled in his hand, and it was
so sad.
Very sad, tragic.
I also love those big historical trashy sagas like Gone with the Wind you can't do anymore, like talking about Sean being worried about sexism and stuff, just the racism of Gone with the Wind. I reread it a couple of years ago. I was like, oh man, no, I mean, you can't even read that anymore. But I loved Forever Amber by Kathleen Winsor. That was amazing. Like, same kind of thing, but set during Restoration England.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of those. McKinley Cantor's Spirit Lake, and there's just all these books that are so problematic, right? Because they're written at a time where the sexism's rampant, they're racist, and what I want to do now is how can you write that kind of sweeping historical escapist thing and try not to reinscribe all the rubbish.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's an interesting challenge. And how to do that, but with an authentic voice to the period is interesting as well.
Which is why you love Buffy too, right? Is how do you do the trashy teen horror stuff without being as bad? I mean, clearly that's got its problems now too, but you could do a new version of it. That's why people love Riverdale.
Well, that's something we haven't mentioned yet, Alex. You have sets of Friday the 13th.
I have sets of Friday the 13th.
Behind you. We can see them.
Sean's covering me because we recorded half of this episode before, and once again, I didn't press record. So I'm thinking we've talked about that.
We haven't talked about it. So we were discussing in our off air, I suppose. We were discussing horror and adolescence. I was saying that in the 90s we used to have these sleepover parties and watch A Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. Sean was also discussing Kevin Bacon's shorts in Friday the 13th.
Well, it's a very important part of adolescence to see those shorts and question your sexuality.
Before he gets stabbed. I think while making love, I think he gets stabbed. But I was, Nightmare on Elm Street, I think, is genuinely clever. I think the idea of a killer in your dreams is clever, and the actor's fantastic and hammy and wonderful.
And as it goes on too, he does quite interesting things in the series, gets so meta with it all.
Yes, he does. And so I don't feel such a shame with that box set. But we were talking about the horror genre, and I've not written really much in that genre, but Sean was saying he has. And there was a bit of a sadistic streak that was emerging.
It's true.
From Sean that you don't expect, and then it creeps up on you. You were taking great delight in torturing people. No,
only on the pages. It is fun coming up with horrible ways to kill and torture someone, isn't it? Am I the only one who thinks that?
Let's take that line out of context. I think it's interesting because, and I know I've spoken about this before, I enjoy the horror genre, absolutely, when it's rooted in fantasy, in a Stephen King, Wes Craven kind of way. I absolutely switch off when we get to some of that. Yeah,
torture
I just
porn.
don't play it. Yeah, we've discussed it. We've discussed it before, but it's worth underlining because escapist, creepy fantasy, it's like a roller coaster or a ghost train. It's a safe space to explore fear and bravery, in fact. And that's a far cry from some of this more exploitative, gory, realist but not kind of stuff. So horror is my guilty pleasure, but in a kind of
camp
specific camp subgenre.
Because as you're saying that, camp is a big thing, but as you're saying, I think you can tell there's a feeling, right? So it's like sex scenes. There's a sense in certain scenes of, is this hateful or not, right? So there are some horror films that are so misogynistic, you feel like there's a getting off on the woman being abused, right? Whereas there are other ones which don't have that sense. And same with romance, or in fact, it just came out and I've forgotten his name. It's just, there was an obituary recently, and there was a romance writer from the 70s, right at the crest of the second wave feminism. There was this big explosion in historical romance with people like Kathleen Woodworth, and this author, Rosemary Savage or someone like that, I can't remember the name, Jennifer St. Clair, I can't remember the name of the author exactly, but people will know if they've read the obituary. And it turned out it was a guy. And it was interesting because those books, when I read them, I hated them because there was such a kind of sense of gross violence in them. And there is in a lot of those books, like Kathleen Woodworth, there's these rape scenes and stuff, but these particular books, that baked in kind of grossness always put me off. And when I found out he was a man, I was like, oh, that's interesting, that I always sensed that gross violence in there. So I wonder if there's that. You can sense that hatefulness or not.
Yeah, you can. And then it's disguised as other things, but the disguises are really thin. Whereas that camp, Wolf Creek, it's disguised as gritty, but actually at the end of the day, imagine being the prop maker for Wolf Creek. But in the kind of camp stuff that I'm sort of talking about, there was, for the time, considering most of it was in like the early 80s, there was this kind of feminist bent to a lot of it, which Buffy riffed on, where usually it was, it's the final girl trope, right? It was
Jamie Lee Curtis.
The Jamie Lee Curtis, Heather Langenkamp character who was the one that got the villain by the end. And I actually think as a young person, this is going to sound very strange, but I think as a young person, a lot of that kind of seeped into my consciousness in quite a positive way. Like, I think a lot of that horror is about people overcoming their fears and anxieties And I think there is a kind of inbuilt, not always, but there can be an inbuilt positivity to a lot of that stuff that I think goes unnoticed or uncelebrated.
I've got a theory about that. I think the theory I have about that, if you also think about Linda What's-Her-Face in Terminator 2, 1 and 2, is this idea that in those films you're getting men as well as women to identify with the female character, which very rarely happens in film, right?
I mean, Sigourney Weaver, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but even if you go to the more exploitative ones, the fact that it's the girl that survives means your audience is identifying with her rather than with, you're not really identifying with Arnold Schwarzenegger or, whereas in a lot of film you're positioned to identify with like the Luke Skywalker character or whatever. See, we had to bring Star Wars in eventually. We've gone a few episodes and not mentioned it. But I think there is that horror often had you identifying with the woman who was facing the threat of violence.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is, I think that's why you feel like it progressed you in some ways.
Well, in some way, I mean, it's a weird thing to say, but I do believe that popular culture does a really good job of white-anting around some social issues in a way that, white-anting is in, rather than chainsawing the issue, we're just picking away. And you do that through role modelling and through point of view. Talking about Star Wars, I think, I've said this before, but going to Comic-Con and seeing all the young little girls now dressing as Rey, and you go, that a little girl can be a Jedi. Now, some people would say that's facile and that's surfacey and blah, blah, blah. But I actually think it really does matter because it just widens your scope of what you can be.
I can't tell you how powerful it was growing up, when I grew up, to have Princess Leia and Marion and they're still put through this kind of sexist filter, but the agency they had, the sass, the intelligence, the fact that Princess Leia's running everything.
I think particularly in the original film, she's brilliant. She gets the gun out and goes, get into the garbage chute, I'm taking over here.
And then, but she's also running the whole rebellion. Like she's the one ordering everyone around and in Empire, and that was really cool. And the fact that at the beginning, I mean, I think they don't treat her so well by the end of the film, but Marion in the original Raiders of the Lost Ark, the way she starts off running the bar and drinking everyone under the table.
Yes,
She was just really cool, and that was really powerful, I think, for me growing up. I loved them.
Yes.
So I think that stuff does matter, and we underestimate it.
And so in romance, it's interesting that romance is always white-anting in a way people don't realise. So it did have, way before pop culture accepted or mainstream culture accepted single mothers or working women, Mills and Boon would have career women as heroines in the 60s, way before it was, mainstreamed. And it does kind of white-ant. It seeds in this kind of feminist idea, or it would have single mothers were a big trope. And that was they were never heroines, right? They were the victim of something normally. But by putting them in romance as the heroine, you do white-ant that idea that you're a victim.
Is that why I wonder we're supposed to feel guilty about these books? Is because they do challenge the hegemony. They do challenge the dominant paradigm, which is that the single mother should be considered the victim in any story. But here's romance championing it.
Also, it's just elitist, isn't it?
It's
There's
elitism.
a classism.
The only class that as a student I openly rebelled against was a screen studies class where they talked about the high art, low art dichotomy, and I just don't buy into it. I actually have never bought into it. So the lecturer, who was lovely, but the lecturer said, if you look at The Lion King, that's low art. And I said, by what metric? These are some of the finest actors in the world, some of the finest some of the finest visual artists in the world.
Well, The Lion King being a rip-off of Kimber the White Lion.
You were going to bring that up. Yes. Which is true.
And in fact, in Japan, they don't have that dichotomy in the same way.
But also musically, right? It's Tim Rice, it's Elton John. These are, these are major artists in my book. And so I just never bought into the high art, low art dichotomy. And getting back to my, I'm doing lots of insect metaphors, white-anting and catching flies with vinegar and so on, or flies with honey. But I actually, it's all part of the same thing for me in my thinking. It's like if you just just chip away with stories. That is my attitude to kind of, I don't know, to making a positive impact. I just think it's a very powerful thing. And I think popular culture is, you know, whether that's through horror, romance, fantasy fiction, sitcoms, whatever that may be. I mean, I think sitcoms, I think Modern Family does some interesting stuff. I think The Cosby Show, I know it's problematic now for what was going on behind the scenes, but as a piece of work on its own, you know, taking that out if you can, it's very hard to take that out. That was showing an African-American family where the father was a doctor and they were living, you know, things that we now take for granted. I think chipping away in that way is arguably more powerful than what you're doing if you're doing a high art elitist piece of work that only 6 critics and your mother are going to see. That's my argument.
What is interesting, because I remember studying The Cosby Show at film school.
I did too.
As an ideological thing, and reading the criticism about it as being assimilative, like as saying that black people have to assimilate in order to be successful and to eradicate black culture, and to those texts are interesting because they move things forward. And then you think about rap music and how it's changed over the years, and gangster rap and the kind of more socially acceptable to white people rap. And I just find that fascinating, because if you think about romance and gender too, and I mentioned Riverdale off air because my daughter tried watching an episode because she's read a novel by someone who is a writer on Riverdale, and the way that plays with gender without it being an issue, or Schitt's Creek, right?
Yes.
The way it puts forth a romance that is same sex without making an issue of it.
Well, that's why I mentioned Modern Family, because I think that does that really well. I mean, it does occasionally draw attention to some of those issues, but they're so normalized, and so the characters are so endearing and lovable that even people I know who have quite conservative views still love those characters. And that is a worthy thing to put out there, I think. I think you said in the last episode, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, which is absolutely true. And blind alleys and mistakes.
And it can be even further, right? Like, backlashes often push you quite a fair way back.
Yeah.
But if you've changed people's perspective or minds enough, it creeps back forward again, right? Because it never occurred to me that I wouldn't work as a mother. And I have friends who've made the choice not to work, and I'm not dissing that at all.
But it's a choice.
But in my head, it was something I always wanted to do, and it wasn't even a question that I couldn't do that. And that is because of all the work done beforehand, but also because of the text. Like, I got to see, not that she's a mother, but I got to see Carrie Fisher running the fucking army and thinking, yep, that's who I'd want to be. Like, I'd want to be the boss.
Yeah.
That says a lot about me.
Coming back to the idea of a guilty pleasure, we are running out of time. Once again, we've tried to tackle an enormous topic in an extremely short time.
That basically sums us up. I think that is, we're ambitious people. That kind of sums us up, right?
That's right. Yeah,
We're
absolutely.
novelists. I need 150,000 words to do this.
Or at least 3 books. Let me ask you this about your guilty pleasures. Is guilt part of the pleasure?
Ooh.
If the thing you loved most was held up by everybody as something completely shame-free, completely accepted, was considered high art, would you love it as much?
That's a very interesting, brilliant question.
That's a really good question, actually, because Alex and I are both people who do like to needle people a bit, and not to speak for you, Alex, but we're people who do like to stir the pot.
Which one of us is worse? Place your bets. Call 1-800-91-AMY.
But, you know, like, for me, I think I've said earlier on in the podcast that choosing romance, I saw my stocks drop a bit, but that was a conscious choice, right?
Yeah.
Like, I could have stayed in literary fiction and won some awards. I mean, I'm not trying to sound arrogant there, like I may not have won any awards.
No, you'd proven your chops in that way. You had done that.
I could have stayed and impressed certain people, but I chose to, as a feminist, pick a patch and fight for it and be like, how come this genre that is 50% of sales is getting marginalized? I think it's sexism. Well, I'm going to have a go at this then and try and but there is a moment now and then where I am, you know, stirring the pot a bit, where I'll post stuff or I'll fight for it to be included as research, and you have a little twinge of like, be nice to be taken seriously again sometimes instead of being ignored. But you're right, maybe the fact that it's a marginalised or guilty form, because it's not marginalised, it's almost 50% of books sold, and I'm probably making a better living than I would as a literary author. But yeah, maybe it is partly what it is that makes us do it.
It's interesting that you say that, you could have done the literary road, and you absolutely could have. And so occasionally I do that too as a playwright. I'll do it their way to show that I can. I'll just do one again. I can do that. Don't think I can't do that.
Well, I do write the short stories and publish them and be like, look, see, I can be fancy, and it's interesting to get the feedback.
Yeah, and then having proven that, you go, but I'm choosing not to for these reasons. Yeah. And I think that's empowering.
And in fact, it gets up my nose that I had actually had a text message a week ago from someone who'd read one of my short stories and was like, oh, you're such a good writer. It's like, you're only saying it because it's the wanky literary stuff. Yeah. I actually think, and I ranted about this at home, the genre fiction stuff is harder to do, and I think my best writing is in the romance, because to deliver that well is some of the hardest writing I've ever done, and I'm so proud that I can do it well. But most people are never going to say that or see it. They're just never going to see that.
And I think, because I've always said a simple story told well is a very hard thing to do. And especially a simple story told well within the expectations of a genre. Very hard to do.
I know we're over time, but what about you, Sean? What do you think?
Oh, I was hoping to dodge the question.
I see how you work. You ask the question and then you dodge it.
Because you've always been a proud ambassador. Like, I've known you a long time. You are not shy about being proud of Star Wars, Doctor Who, all of it. And you are a polymath as well, who is also equally versed in all the high art. So
I love this. I love this praise you're heaping upon me. I'm not sure that I entirely deserve it. I think for me, the marginalisation is part of the pleasure. The fact I feel like sometimes I love things that nobody else likes. And if it all became much more popular, I think some of the spark would go out. But that's just the part of me that I don't like very much, that likes being different and being the weird one. I try not to encourage that. The what? Creepy, did you say?
No, creative.
Creative.
Like, I think a lot of writers were loners or are loners or are outside the box, and that's part of why we like what we like.
Yeah, and I think I felt pushed out of society enough because I didn't like sports and et cetera, et cetera. I think I chose that as part of my identity. So I chose things to like that most people didn't like, and embraced that, and this guilty pleasure became part of my identity.
But it's so weird, because all the stuff where we're like, it's guilty and it's stuff people doesn't like, outsells everything else by like 1,000,000 to 1. So there's so many of us.
It's paying the mortgage, but
sure.
says they don't like it.
Like we say we're like alone in it, but there's millions of other people who are alone in it with us.
It's a good thing. It's a great place to be. As always, it's been a pleasure, and not a guilty one, chatting with you two. We might need to return to this topic. I feel like we could talk about our pop cultural loves until the cows come home, or until the insects come home. If you prefer, Alex, the weevils. Don't say,
because I've still got ants in my kitchen, Sean. So
what about spiders? Have you got spiders at the moment?
I don't. No, the spiders have been evicted.
Oh,
to the best of my knowledge.
I've got possums. I've got possums in this place, and they hiss at everything.
Yeah, I love that. No matter what's going on, the possums are at war with each other. Doesn't matter what's happening, the possums have got their thing going on.
They're like galloping all over the roof.
Yeah, they've got their own thing going on. So on that note,
creatures.
On that oddball note,
happy possum hunting, happy ant squashing.
Oh my God, it just got really macabre, Sean.
Horror.
Yeah, horror.
He's not that nice.
Happy possum stroking, that sounds even worse.
Oh, that's no good.
Oh, good grief, Alex.
Happy writing.
Happy writing.
Yeah, happy writing.
Why don't you write when you don't need money? All your notes sound alike too much. All of them start with I love you, honey, but they end with the same old touch. Just for a change, send a nice loving letter and cut out that please remit. Why don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
In fiction, yes. No, that's easy. I should have made that absolutely
We've
clear.
done the elbows to death. That's enough of the elbows.
Thank goodness we've moved on from that topic.
We can actually see his naked elbows at the moment. He's actually making a bit of a point of it.
His elbows are exposed, ladies and gentlemen.
I didn't realise that's a defensive posture, isn't it? Where you got your hands behind your head and your elbows sticking out.
No, it's a display posture that we're now witnessing.
Talk about the elbows.
We're seeing the fully exposed weenus is there.
Double weenus, actually.
The one person here who doesn't drink caffeine, I can safely say that my colleagues
Have had too much. Yeah.